Fasting. You may or may not have heard of it, but it is a subject I am super, super passionate about, to the point that I am probably a bore to friends and family. It's something that I discovered almost accidentally, due to the fact that I take steroids, and I realized that one of the challenges posed by steroids was actually weight gain and constant snacking. And on this journey of discovery, I realized that fasting was far more than actually weight loss, although that can be a benefit of it. Fasting has grown in its, I suppose, importance and the awareness of it in the past few years, due to something that most people are aware of, which was COVID, which is COVID. Let's not be so optimistic to think it's gone. And unfortunately, one of the side effects of COVID is long COVID, and the number of people struggling with this are huge all across the world. However, on my sort of explorations of the internet, I was fortunate enough to find a gentleman who is incredibly passionate also, I think, about fasting, and who set up an incredible support group on Facebook, which I've found absolutely invaluable in terms of the information shared, the camaraderie, and the general kindness of other members. Tom Bunker, thank you and welcome to this Healing Feeling. And I suppose, first of all, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling excellent today, actually. Thank you. I happened to fast yesterday, and I use my Garmin smartwatch to track some metrics, my sleep and stuff, and my heart rate variability was like the highest I've seen it for quite a while. So apparently, apparently that was a good thing.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. But things weren't so great a few years ago when you actually got sick, were they?
Oh yeah, I've had a number of ups and downs. I've had and almost recovered from long COVID twice. I got it initially in March of 2020, and after about 4 months, I gradually recovered. And I think I fully recovered that time. I was able to go elk hunting, do strenuous hiking in the high altitude mountains of Colorado with my brother. Unfortunately, he had like a lingering cold or some sniffles that he got from his wife. And while we were hunting, she texted him and said that she had just tested positive for COVID. And we just looked at each other, because that meant that he had it, and that meant that I was starting to get it as well for my second time. And my second time, it was just a mild head cold that kind of lingered for a couple of weeks. And after a week, or after 3 weeks, I thought it was totally gone. And I went out and I did a strenuous backpacking weekend, which was so much fun. But it was, in hindsight, I think it may have triggered severe long COVID, because all of a sudden, the day after my backpacking, I had severe fatigue. And the day after that, I had wham, just out of the blue, like 9 or 10 typical long COVID symptoms. The fatigue, the difficulty sleeping. I had suddenly had anxiety, the brain fog, head pressure. That was kind of, I think, the main things I had at the time. But it really laid me low and then the first time I recovered in 2020, I had seen, just by chance, I had like gained like 10 or 15 pounds fighting my long COVID, because it affects the stress hormones, and cortisol increases your appetite. And for a while, I wasn't eating very healthy. I was eating too much. And so I was like, wow, I want to get healthy again. And so I started mainly just to lose weight. I wanted to I hate diets, so I wanted to just change my eating habits. And I went to a lower carb diet and started eating in a 8 or 9 hour window per day. I, some people call it intermittent fasting. I prefer to call it time restricted eating.
Mm.
And after 2.5 weeks of that, my head pressure, which was pretty constant, all of a sudden I had like a severe, it stepped up a notch or two for like 8 or 10 hours. I remember it was a Sunday and I was like, what the heck is going on? And after that headache went, or worse head pressure went away, it didn't come back. Like my brain fog was and head pressure were gone.
Incredible.
And I was like, wow, what is going on? This is so bizarre. So I was trying to lose weight by the time restricted eating and a lower carb, healthier diet. And all of a sudden, I started seeing real improvements in my long COVID symptoms. And
Wow.
so, but the second time I got sick, I said, well, let's explore this a little bit more because I mean, not only was I desperate to get better, but I have this burning scientific curiosity to try to figure out what's going on. And I started doing periodic short water fasts. And I also started experimenting with supplements and foods and things that, from basic research, are known to induce enough cellular stress to trigger this deep cleaning process, which is called autophagy. And at the time, I didn't know anything about autophagy. When I had gone to graduate school, they did autophagy, even though it's a basic cellular process, it wasn't yet discovered. But a lot had happened in the decades since I'd been in graduate school. And in 2016, a Japanese basic researcher got the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for his important discovery of autophagy. Uh, he did it in the basic organism yeast, that it turns out is fundamental to,
Oh,
as far as I know, all living cells.
incredible. Wow. So fortunate that it was in 2006. Did you say 2016? Was that it? It was eight, roughly.
Yeah, well, that was when his basic pioneering research was recognized with a Nobel Prize. But
Yeah.
there have been 2 decades of tons of basic research on autophagy, uh, and in cell culture and in mice and rats, but virtually nothing in people because there's a technical roadblock. They just don't have a good way to measure it in living, breathing people. Like we need something like equivalent to an X-ray or a PET scan or something that can show you real time what's going on and where, as far as autophagy goes in the body, and researchers don't have that. So instead, they have to use mice or rats or just basic cells. And if they're using mice, they kill the mice and section them up, and then figure out what's going on at a certain time point. So it's a huge there's a huge knowledge base in this basic research, and it has yet to make the leap into you know solid human medical application.
And that word autophagy, is that correct? Autophagy? Yeah. That is, I'd say, the kind of the magic word, isn't it, really, in the reduced window or intermittent fasting world, because that, I mean, the way that I describe it to people is it's a bit like a vacuum cleaner comes in and sort of vacuums up the nasties in the body. Is that a little bit too simplistic?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it is kind of like a vacuum cleaner. It's a deep cleaning, but it's like you have to think of it's only within a cell.
Oh,
There's other ways of getting rid of debris outside of cells, macrophages and neutrophils and things that will mop up debris, as well as the kidney and the liver. But within the cell, it's so I like to think of the cell as, like, say, it's like a factory, and maybe a pretty big complex factory, like, say, an automobile manufacturing plant. And when I mean, cells exist to do things and to, they're specialized into, nerve cells and skin cells, and there's all different kinds of cells or factories going on within our cell, and they work together, to do as
Mm.
as tissues and organs and the miracle of our bodies. But within a cell, it's very complex. There's thousands of proteins present, but basically, there's a lot of things that can get out of balance and cause dysfunction. So, if a factory isn't getting, enough power, that's a real problem for production. If the factory, isn't getting enough inputs, the raw materials to produce the cars or whatever, that's a real problem. And if the roof is leaky, and that's a real problem. So there's all these maintenance tasks that have to happen, or things that can happen to make a factory or a cell less functional. And basically, autophagy is just kind of a generic process where there's all these adapters, and there's lots and lots of different adapters that are like sensors, and they go out and they see what is damaged in the cell. So if there's if the lipid ratio isn't right in the cell membrane, that could be targeted. Or if the mitochondria is not working properly and is damaged, or if there's a lot of oxidative stress, or if there's when the cell is making these proteins, they can aggregate and clump together. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and all these adapters recognize different dysfunctional things in the cell, and they bring their cargo that they recognize is damaged, and they bring it to what's called a phagosome or autophagosome, and that fuses like with another membrane-bound organelle called the lysosome, and that's full of degradative enzymes. And so basically, whatever's damaged in the cell gets degraded and down to like basic amino acids and basic components and reused. So
Wow.
it's kind of a cleanup and recycling mechanism, but the adapters that like sense all the different damaged things in the cells, like the real magic.
Crikey. Yeah, I'm not even going to try and to repeat what you've just said there, because it was articulated so clearly that we have this incredible ability within our bodies to actually sort things out. But for this process to start happening, we need to stop putting in distractions and complications of food. Would that be correct?
So, I mean, the regulation of autophagy is complicated. I think it's partly regulated by the day-night cycle or the circadian clock. Like a bunch of hormones, like hunger hormones and stress hormones, go up and down on this regular day-night cycle. And there's some evidence that autophagy, at least the kind of the low level, like, quick cleanup of the cleanup of the kitchen, or the quick sweep of the floor, that happens on a daily basis. They call that basal autophagy, and I think that happens mainly in the evening and maybe a little bit first thing, like around sunrise. But then when there's a major cell stress that happens, like nutrient deprivation, which happens during fasting, or a lot of oxidative stress, or lack of oxygen, there's a whole bunch of things, viral infection, there's a whole bunch of things that can cause a major imbalance. And that's when it triggers this really strong deep cleaning. And basically, the factory is totally shut down during this strong autophagy, and the cells stop replicating, they stop dividing, stop growing, and all their energy goes towards, this cleanup and repair. And that's kind of why what I recommend in my Facebook group is just, just periodically inducing strong autophagy, because, fundamentally, it's a response to self-stress.
Hmm.
And I just don't think that we want to stress ourselves day in and day out, or week in and week out. I don't think that's the
No.
path to optimum health. However, I will say, like, fundamentally, how best to use harness autophagy to like fight long COVID and perhaps some other chronic illnesses, there's a lot of unknowns.
Mm. Yeah, a lot of unknowns, and yet at the same time, the kind of the evidence that's coming back in terms of people actually having some successes, especially sort of in your Facebook group, that sort of suggests that for people who've tried different ways of actually healing from the symptoms of long COVID, which can be quite varied, I think, and we will go into that in a second, it's actually something that is universally available, isn't it? It's a free thing you can do. And actually, if you do some research into it and you're careful and you stay hydrated, or I think most of the time anyway, this could be something that could help you in your recovery. Would you say that's correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct, Lucinda, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit. So I started off, I was motivated to do this Facebook group based on my personal experience on my second long haul, which was much worse. But kind of more typical. I gradually recovered over about 4 months to zero symptoms, and I thought I was going to fully recover again. And then I had like some major physical and emotional stress, and I had a relapse. And ever since then, I've kind of been chronic, relatively mild long COVID, although I hate to use the word mild and long COVID in the same
Mm.
sentence, much less on the same page or paragraph, because even mild long COVID can be really terrible.
Yeah.
But
Gosh.
uh, basically with my Facebook group, I made this online Google survey, and kind of just on a totally ad hoc, informal basis, I was asking people to track their symptoms as they were fasting for 1 or 2 days once a week, and also trying, like resveratrol as a supplement to induce autophagy, just 1 or 2 consecutive days per week, and like olive leaf extract or olive oil. There's quite a number of things that um, appear to induce autophagy. Um, and I think it's partly a reason that, well, I'm starting to digress.
No,
Um,
no, go on, go on. Tell us.
well, 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 but anyway, I've done this preliminary research online, totally ad hoc, using Google Form survey, and I tracked people's symptoms for weeks, and in some cases for months. And what I saw, I actually wrote it up as a scientific paper, but I found out I couldn't get it published because I didn't have institutional review board approval, which is required for any human subject study. And me, I've done lots of research, in the bench, but it was all basic research, not applied on people. So I didn't even know that you can't even get a paper on a preprint server unless you have, your IRB number showing that you've, met that
Oh,
hurdle.
goodness. Gosh.
But anyway, so from my preliminary research, what I saw was that roughly 70% of the people were responders, where if they adopted a no sugar, kind of low carb diet and ate in a 8 or 9 hour window per day, uh, or maybe 10-hour window per day, uh, and and tried these 1 or 2 day water fasts each week, that about 70% of the people saw a very significant reduction in their symptoms. And initially, I was just counting the number of symptoms, and the very good responders got down. I mean, some of them got down to zero symptoms,
Wow.
uh, but I'd say about half the people saw half their symptoms or more go away doing this over about 10 or 12 weeks. And so, since then, with my own personal experience and just, talking with lots of people through social media and Zoom calls, etc., I think that the very best responders do have a chance of getting cured. But that's, probably a small percentage, maybe 5 or 10% at most. But because it's cheap and simple, and I now think it's quite safe for long haulers to do, basically, I think every long hauler in the world should give it a try
Mm-hmm.
for 10 or 12 weeks, see how they respond. And if it doesn't work, well, say, okay, well, I tried that and now I'll move on to try something else. But for some people, it appears to trigger, a pretty, I want to say, dramatic improvement in their symptoms, or at least it significantly reduces their long COVID symptom burden. And I can, talk later about why I think it might be doing that.
And
There's
if
more to it than autophagy.
oh, there's a bit of a teaser there for the later part of the episode. But just say if someone is interested in doing that, they should go to your Facebook group, I take it, and they can find the information there about how to proceed. Is that the best course of action?
I mean, there's two routes. You can join my Facebook group, which is long COVID dash improve via fasting slash autophagy,
Mm-hmm.
or I have a website, um, which I created when I was a little bit more optimistic about it, and uh, it's called uh, recover from long COVID.com. Yeah, recoverfromlongcovid.com. And then I have a number of pages and blogs on there. I put a lot of information on there. I don't know how, and there's no advertisement, no dollar value associated with anything. This is just me trying to help people out. And I characterize the symptoms and just share a lot of interesting things that I've found during my informal research.
Well, through your informal research, I think you've just been incredibly kind to so many, because in that group, as I mentioned, that there is just so much information available to people and those stories of hope. One thing on this podcast I've noticed is the idea of healing. It is a journey. The destination may, for some, be living without the symptoms of whatever they started off with. But for some, actually, it's a better quality of life, or living with the symptoms in a way. Um, but the fasting, I mean, when I started doing research into it, my sort of thoughts were like, oh wow, autophagy, and then it was like reduce inflammation. I've got autoimmune hepatitis. I was like, well, that could help. Then there was the idea of insulin sensitivity. There was cellular repair, as you mentioned, and then the mental clarity, which I think you said you probably had in the past, or you've had, and I've definitely had at times. But I mean, that in itself, for someone who's got brain fog, could be really helpful, couldn't it?
Yeah, during when people do a water fast, and this, even if so what I generally suggest is to start your fast in the evening, and so like night, day, night would be a 36-hour water fast, but really it's just one full day. And so I just did a 36-hour water fast, and I checked my blood glucose and ketones first thing this morning, and my ketones were 1.0 and my blood glucose was 77. And that put me like smack dab right in the middle of moderate ketosis. So even a one full day fast can cause a lot of physiological changes. And I like to make the analogy to a hybrid fueled car, where when the car is burning gasoline, that's like our body. It's like we're constantly, I mean, on a regular basis, we're consuming food, and that's like burning gas. And it's, you can stop on that. Well, anyway, it's and then when you fast, there's still some glucose. You use up your glycogen stores in your liver first, but it makes this transition to burning more and more fat via ketone bodies for fuel. And your heart and your brain love ketones because they're very clean burning. They're a good energy source. And because they're so clean burning, that's what I think is kind of like, using the battery or the stored electricity in a hybrid fuel vehicle. And if you go back, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, it's like there wasn't a grocery store just down the block. People were feasting or fasting. I mean, basically, it was feast or famine. There were a lot of ups and downs in the availability of the food supply. It wasn't until the advent of agriculture that all of a sudden, they figured out how to store grains and store carbohydrates in food and level things out. And today, with the modern world, has just gone to the nth degree. Like everyone lives like they're royalty because with the superabundance of caloric food all the time. And I don't think that's optimum for our health.
No, no, it's really, really, yeah, really interesting you say that. And also, I suppose if we look back at things like when people didn't have fridges and there was you didn't have access to kind of snacking. We live in a lifestyle now where food is always available, always accessible, and so many people, and possibly due to the economic situation or time, will go for things which are unhealthy and in quantity, and then that will lead to weight gain and lots of sort of sugar and inflammation in the body. And so then with this thought about fasting, you kind of said very sort of like, oh, there's something else I'd like to mention. So tell us
Yeah.
about it a bit.
Okay. Yeah. So the really interesting phenomena that I think most long haulers have experienced is like just a sudden flare up of their symptoms. And as far as I can tell, like the medical profession is totally ignoring this. And yet I think it's really important and really fascinating. So, and it happens. Okay, first of all, during a fast, it, whether through the production of ketones or other physiological mechanisms, it's definitely, our cells are controlled, like the metabolism is kind of like a cable car with this lever that's like go forward, push it forward, and that's what this mTOR1 complex does. It's like if there's abundant nutrients and amino acids, it's like full speed ahead, and then it can like pull back if you want to coast. And then if there's a shortage of nutrients or stresses, then it pulls back on the lever and puts the brakes on, and that's when the factory shuts down and autophagy is triggered and all adapters go out and clean it and clean up everything and repair it. And during that process, if there's any viral proteins, if there's aggregated proteins, they get degraded. If there's viral proteins present in an infected cell, a percentage of them will also get degraded. And these protein fragments, there's a amazing system where these short protein fragments of like 8 or 10 amino acids long get presented on the cell surface. And so the degradation of the autophagy and also the ubiquitin proteasome system kind of work together. There's this crosstalk between them. And anyway, the viral protein fragments get presented on the cell surface where all of a sudden the immune cells that are on patrol for like virally infected cells can see them. And I think that explains why the majority of long haulers, when they do, say, a 36-hour water fast, either during the fast or more typically like the day that they refeed, they will experience a flare up of at least some of their long COVID symptoms. And it's really variable from person to person. It could just be 1 or 2 symptoms for 4 or 6 hours, or it could be a whole bunch of symptoms with a real strong flare up for a day, sometimes even 2 days, rarely even longer. And So what I think this flare up is, you know, a person's immune system going, aha, that's where this pesky virus is hiding, and taking appropriate action to, you know, kill, perhaps kill virally infected cells, or, uh, whatever it's doing to fight the virus. And there's localized inflammation. And so basically, I call this that, a lot of people are familiar with the term Herx, which is short for the Herxheimer reaction. That's a medical technical term for like a sudden flare up due to taking an antibiotic and killing off a bunch of bacteria, like the spirochete bacteria in syphilis. But in long haulers, I don't think that applies. I think we're getting a flare up and an immune system was all of a sudden stimulated, but I think it's an antiviral flare up. So instead of calling it a Herx, I like to call it a Verx. And that's a brand new word that I hope to get in the dictionary someday.
Brilliant. You heard it here.
And so these Verxes, like you may feel increased head pressure. To me, that implies that there's viral infection somewhere in the brain or in the skull, like the choroid plexus. There's a lot of evidence now that that has ACE2 and can be infected, at least in brain organoids, and also some pathology studies. They found the spike protein in the choroid plexus, and that's basically like the blood-brain barrier actually has two major parts. The traditional blood-brain barrier, which is a whole bunch of different cell types and pretty hard to breach, and the choroid plexus, which is a single layer of epithelial cells between like the blood supply and the cerebral spinal fluid. And that layer of epithelial cells can, at least in the lab, can be infected by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So when I feel like this head pressure, I personally think it's, the viral infection in my choroid plexus. And if I trigger an increased antiviral immune response, then I'll get a flare up of my head pressure. And it's usually just, goes from mild to moderate, or, kind of goes up one step in severity. But basically, these Verx reactions, it can be some people, like I have this gut tightness, bloated feeling. There's a lot of evidence saying the virus can affect the lining of the gut, again, the gut epithelial cells in the gut, and it can persist for months and months. And unfortunately, long haulers get these reactions in their heart, like mild myocarditis, sometimes in the cartilage, like just all across their chest or ribs. Some people get it in their spine. And it's basically, these aches and pains, this Verx reaction, I think is telling us it's what tissues and cell types are infected varies from person to person. But as a group, it's capable of infecting a huge variety of cell types and organs and tissues. And I have to say, the thing that most worries me is that it's now known that SARS-CoV-2 can invade neurons, and it can even spread from nerve cell to nerve cell directly. And I think that's why long haulers have such a cluster of dysautonomia symptoms. So it can get in, if it gets in the vagus nerve, that affects your temperature regulation, potentially your digestion, signaling to your heart, as well as digestion, and it controls all the internal organs.
Oh.
And and it may get in the brain through this compromise of the choroid plexus barrier. And I don't think it's really targeting our neurons, but it's affecting these astrocytes, or astroglia, that are like support cells that help provide nutrients to the nerve cells. So, and if there's inflammation, viral-related inflammation in the brain, basically there's a big cluster of neurocognitive symptoms that long haulers experience. Memory loss, difficulty concentrating, problems with visual processing, uh, sensitivity to loud noise. I mean, it's quite alarming, this huge cluster of neurocognitive symptoms. And so, yeah, basically, that's what I think is going on with this Virx reaction, or this flare up of symptoms typically after a fast. And a whole bunch of things that induce autophagy can trigger the exact same flare up reaction. I've tried a whole bunch of things, and it's not, generally they trigger all the symptoms, maybe not all at the same time. But what's interesting is they have a different time course. Like fasting, the flare up happens generally after the fast of the day you're refeeding. Some things like olive leaf extract, or olive oil, if I just drizzle 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil on my salad at noon, I get the flare up in the evening, or like around sunset.
Incredible.
So there's a different time lag between when you ingest something and when you experience this flare up.
And so this Burke's experience would actually be a way for someone who's struggling with long COVID to get a feel for actually where the infection could be targeting their body.
That's my hypothesis, that it will tell you. I mean, there's a lot of variables, like how vigorous someone's antiviral immune response is, but potentially what tissues are infected and what the viral load is, like how much viruses are actually there. So there's a lot of variables, but basically in my second long haul, where I had like 8 or 10 symptoms, and I was experiencing this VERX, or this flare up, on a regular basis. I was trying to do it once a week, but I probably ended up doing it, a little bit more frequently, because I was experimenting with all these things. And what happened was that over time, the length and strength of my VERX reaction got milder and milder and milder, until some of my symptoms started completely going away. My very last symptom was difficulty sleeping, insomnia. And then boom, all of a sudden one night I slept perfectly, and it didn't come back until, like a month or two later, when I had my relapse. And so, yeah, the way I connect the dots is that this VERX reaction, if you have a really strong VERX reaction, it means you may have a viral load, and I think it can potentially tell you the sites of persistent viral infection.
Yeah, which is super helpful, because then, I mean, someone could possibly as well then look to other things like maybe acupuncture or some sort of Reiki healing, whatever alternative therapies they wanted on those areas of their body, if they wanted to go in that direction. That's just me just pontificating about the
well, listen, I've been flabbergasted at how many things can cause this long haul flare up or VERX. And some people, I haven't done this, but some people report that acupuncture can cause a mild flare up.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, that is interesting. Gosh. So yeah, I mean, there's so much unknown, and yet you are making incredible headway through personal investigation on this, which is just so super. And in terms of someone who is going to considering doing a fast, what about if they take medication supposedly in the morning? How would you kind of get around that or work with it?
So I'm not a medical doctor or a pharmacist, so I really can't say, for sure that you can take your medications or you can't take your medications. Uh, I don't take a lot of medications, but generally, I think if you're just doing a short 1 or 2 day fast, I think generally it's safe to just continue, or better to continue your medications than starting and stopping them. A lot of medications start to get withdrawal symptoms if you suddenly stop them.
Yes.
So, and you can still drink water or tea, so
Mm.
things, even though the cells go into, switch over to burning ketones and make these physiological changes. I mean, potentially it affects the way the liver metabolizes a number of these drugs. So maybe it might temporarily increase the dose, or it might temporarily lower the dose of your medication. I really don't know.
No, no. So that's something that someone should do their personal investigation into and be very cautious with. But interesting nonetheless to know that it could make the drugs more
Yeah.
powerful or less so. And your version of fasting, no coffee, no tea, just water, I take it.
No. Tea is fine. Green tea, black tea, herbal teas are generally fine. I mean, what I advocate is just doing one autophagy method at a time. So like when you're fasting, stop the majority of your supplements, because long haulers gravitate towards these autophagy inducing supplements, because taken on a daily basis, it appears to have an anti-inflammatory effect.
Yes.
But like fish oil, if I take fish oil, I'm just the typical dose in a fish oil supplement. I'm fine that same day, but the second and third day, I will experience a flare up of my symptoms. So generally, I would say try to stop, anything other than like a daily multivitamin. I would stop. I would stop the supplements, because just do one thing at a time. And I've experimented some with like taking olive oil extract, olive leaf extract, and fasting at the same time, or fish oil and fasting at the same time. And I can't tell that there's any benefit from doing that.
No, that makes sense. And I think sometimes as well, there's a tendency for people to be trying to take a lot of supplements in the hope that they'll work, but actually when you're doing something like this, you really need to sort of simplify the course of action, don't you, so that you actually can say, I'm trying this works or this doesn't, and not have anything else mixing it up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people are desperate to feel better, so I understand the people that are taking 5 or 10 or 15 supplements. For my formal diet and fasting study, I enrolled one gentleman that was taking 50 supplements all at once.
Oh my goodness, crikey. Wow. Well, not only is that just crikey, just like the amount of supplements, but the time it must have taken to take all those, and the cost is just
The cost would be very substantial.
mind-boggling. And I suppose it's, I mean, that I'm guilty of it, that enthusiasm. You see something that says energy on it, or sort of weight loss, and you think, yeah, that's the way forward. But if you are mixing things up, you're never going to know what works. So actually, no,
It's much harder to figure out what's helping and what isn't.
totally.
I mean,
So,
so I'm a big advocate of occasionally stopping everything for a
yeah.
few days. Like let your body and your cells reset and find out what your true baseline of symptoms is. And you can only find that out by stopping everything for at least 3 or 4 days, maybe a week.
Yes, that makes sense. And before we came on, we were talking a little bit about the kind of the words that get used to do with healing and recovery. And apologies if you could hear a puppy in the background whining. I pretend it's a seal, but it's a puppy. It'd be a bit weird if I did have a seal. Anyway, and so based on that, what did I just say? my brain fog there.
Before the puppy, you were talking something about healing.
Oh yes. So thank you very much. So the word heal is something that a lot of people want to hear, but when we're actually looking at something like COVID, where there's so many unknowns still, do you think it's better to think about recovery, or how do you like to phrase things?
Uh, I think we want to improve our symptoms and reduce our symptom burden as much as possible.
Mm.
Some people are fortunate and are able to totally get rid of all their symptoms or get them just to a couple of really mild symptoms. But I think for most people, this appears to be a chronic thing that we're just, it's like the pandemic hit and the Titanic sunk, and we're all crammed in these lifeboats with no help from the medical profession, and we're just, at the the mercy of the wild seas. And I think we just want to, keep our heads above the water and manage our symptoms as best we can. We want to, I mean, what scares me is that potentially long term, this could lead to, uh, early dementia or some more severe health things.
Mm.
And I just think we want to minimize our symptom burden as much as we can. And basically, that means, I think it means eating, adopting a super healthy lifestyle and figuring out what is a super healthy lifestyle.
Absolutely. And with I probably shouldn't go down this tangent, but why do you think that the medical profession is being so, but we feel almost so slow at kind of coming up with any solutions to this?
Well, it all depends on your perspective. And I have a foot in the medical research, or in as a scientist in the research world, and I have a foot, my whole body in the long COVID world.
Mm.
And as a long hauler, yes, things are happening at an incredibly slow glacial rate. You're looking at social media and you're seeing like the NIH Recover study that spent most of their $1.6 billion, and you just start to get really frustrated pretty easy. And in particular, the slow pace of clinical trials and initiating clinical trials is super frustrating. But there's also a case to be made from a scientific and medical perspective, is that, we have to understand the disease before we can develop drugs and target therapies and, really intelligently try to address this.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that, but I'm kind of in the long COVID camp. Like we need like, for the vaccine development, there was this Operation Warp Speed. We need something comparable to that for clinical trials, because we don't have to understand exactly what's going on to treat this constellation of symptoms. We just have to try a whole bunch of things at it. Throw a whole bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks. And
Yeah.
there's no, because of the cost and complexity of clinical trials, there's no effort currently underway to do that.
Wow, that's so sad and so scary, really, isn't it? Gosh. And is there anything you'd like to add to what we've discussed today? Anything I might have missed?
Well, yeah, I have lots and lots of thoughts. I'd say that, you know, er, um, as far as what long COVID is,
Mhm.
there appears, it's this big constellation of symptoms. There's the autonomic dysfunction cluster of symptoms, tachycardia, heart palpitations, hot or cold hands and feet, shortness of breath, difficulty swallowing, sometimes difficulty with the digestive tract, dizziness or lightheadedness. The most common symptoms are fatigue and the post-exertional malaise, but not everyone has those. There's a huge cluster of neurocognitive symptoms, the brain fog, head pressure, uh, difficulty concentrating. For a lot of people, it's just difficulty carrying on a conversation or communicating. Um, I think the insomnia or the sleeping difficulties are kind of neurocognitive. And slowed information processing. People may not be able to drive or watch TV, and memory issues, especially short-term memory issues. And a lot of people report anxiety and depression and irritability, and some even report dissociation, where they're just like their emotions are just not there, like they're flat. I think the tinnitus, the ringing in the ears, some people have a balance problems. And muscle joint pain, nerve pain, rib and chest pain, body tremors and twitches, pins and needles, leg weakness, a whole variety of heart issues. Although generally, a lot of long haulers go to see a cardiologist and their heart checks out or mostly checks out. So, there's this huge cluster of common symptoms. And I think, unfortunately, the medical profession is kind of a little bit flummoxed. Like, this is so many things going on. Like, and the long COVID clinics, at least in the US, someone gets referred to a long COVID clinic. And what they want to know typically is, what is your worst symptom? Because they want to know what specialist to refer you to. Should they refer you to a cardiologist? Should they refer you to a neurologist, et cetera? And so, currently medicine is in these silos, and they don't match up at all with this huge cluster of long COVID symptoms.
Yeah, there's no integration, no overlapping, and I think that's been a problem in the UK health system for years in terms of actually diagnosing people. That one department didn't talk to another department. When it comes to something like COVID, there needs to be a discussion between these specialists, and people need to be seeing the specialists for each part of their condition.
Well, and unfortunately, the specialists don't have any treatments yet. So, I mean, basically, we have to educate the whole medical profession on, the ones that don't know about dysautonomia and these common neurocognitive symptoms, and the cranial nerve infections, like the neck soreness, the throat soreness, the base of the skull soreness. I think that's the viral infection in the cranial nerves. And some people get it in the, around their face, the trigeminal nerve, and I have one gentleman that's really suffering in my Facebook group. He for a while he was in a wheelchair, but now his worst symptom is that when he gets severe pain and twitching in his face and his mouth and around his eyes. And like any little thing can trigger it. And it's just clearly, I'm afraid, his nerves are getting so bad, maybe they're becoming demyelinated. And maybe his immune response is a little too aggressive.
Gosh. What does demyelinated mean?
Oh, so nerves are insulated, kind of like electrical wire. There's, to avoid a short, you have to put a layer of plastic insulation around the electric wire. And our nerves basically do the same thing. And they have the plastic, or the insulator is what's called the myelin sheath.
Yes.
So yeah, the severe nerve pain or the really bad twitches and tremors may indicate that the nerves are starting to lose, some of their myelin sheath.
Crikey. Crikey, crikey, crikey. And this with COVID, is what's happening in the body at times this inflammation of parts of it, and that's why it's getting so angry, and we're getting these pain responses and these reactions.
Yeah, so the way I view it, I mean, so I'm trained as an immunologist, although that was decades ago. But I have the scientific background, and basically, the way I view it is that the SARS-CoV-2 infection is like a stress test of our immune system, and in particular, our antiviral immune responses. And fortunately, the majority of people, perhaps 80% of the population, is able to fairly quickly, fairly efficiently, completely clear the virus. And those that have lingering viral infection, are going to develop, at least one or a bunch of long COVID symptoms, depending on where it's able to persist in the tissues. And I think that, after months or certainly after years, it's like the immune system is in more of a containment phase. It's not trying to totally eradicate the virus from the body any longer because A, the virus has gotten really good at hiding from the immune system, and B, if it's in certain cell types like neurons or the vagus nerve, like those are really important nerve cells. They're long, they have all these complicated connections, and the body, I think the immune system is smart enough to know that, well, if I kill that virally infected nerve cell, that's going to mess up, the fix is going to be worse than the problem.
Right.
So I think seems like to me like it's able to persist in the cranial nerves and perhaps in some of the brain cells and the chorioid plexus in the skull and perhaps in the gut. And I'm afraid that for a lot of people, that's going to be a chronic
Yeah.
condition because it's, for one reason or another, our immune system like tried to get rid of it and it's not able to.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we're in the trench warfare phase, like the Ukraine war, unfortunately. It's like, they're initially there was a lot of back and forth and now settled down to, just a long, prolonged battle, kind of a war of attrition. And I think our immune system is just trying to contain it and minimize the spread to other tissues.
Mm. Yeah, a sobering thought that. But returning to the positives, in your group, there are lots of good stories of people doing well. So
There are, but but I also say, like every person's different.
yes.
Uh, and I don't want to talk very much about my formal clinical trial, but it's basically I'm seeing the same pattern of things that I did in my informal trial. And basically, 50% of the people I would say are very good responders with the diet and the fasting, and some people start to see very significant decreases in their symptoms just with the dietary changes, going low carb and eating, in a 8 to 10 hour window. But I think that this water fasting just for one or just, fasting for 1 or 2 full days, I think it stimulates the antiviral immune response in a percentage of the people. And some people see dramatic improvements following several water fasts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think doing 3 or 4 water fasts over a month or two is something that I would encourage anyone to try. Although do drink uh, some electrolytes to like
Yeah.
minimize any risk and have other people around to make sure you don't go into the real low blood sugar.
Yes, I accidentally got into keto flu a couple of months ago and didn't realize it was keto flu until about 3/4 of the way through. And then I remembered I should have taken some electrolytes, and it was not a pleasant experience. And so I mean, and the definition of ketone, is it, am I even saying it right? That sort of flu symptoms of when you're fasting, it's when you feel really, really rubbish, but that's because the whole thing is happening. And I suppose now, actually thinking about it, for someone like myself, ketone flu is actually probably did you call it varging? Varging? What's your
Oh,
term
the
for it?
Burks,
The
the Burks
Verks.
reaction. Well,
Verks
I
reaction.
mean, Burks, which rhymes with Herx, which stands for the Herxheimer reaction. So yeah, long haulers can experience a Burks or a flare up of their symptoms during the fast.
Yeah.
Typically, it's in the evening, but sometimes it hits in the morning after 24 hours. But the majority of people, they don't on a short fast, they don't experience it until a couple hours after they resume eating.
Yeah. So Yeah, whatever happened to me was a bit weird then. Okay, well, um, so yeah, that's a bit perplexing. I must do some investigation to that. Well, thank you so much for today. It's been incredibly informative, and I've learned a lot. We had actually had an interview a few years ago, and since that point, you have become even more informed and progressed further on your journey. So can't wait to see where the next steps take you. Um, where do
Well,
you where do you
yeah,
see
I
yourself?
mean, the next big milestone for me personally is to complete the formal diet and fasting for long COVID study. And I will say that we are including people whose long COVID symptoms started right after vaccination as well.
Mm.
And so far, both groups are responding identically. You know, there's some people that don't respond, like especially if you drink alcohol on a regular basis. And there's some people that are phenomenal, good responders in both groups. So my hypothesis, which I have on a blog on my recover from longcovid.com website, is that perhaps the people dealing with this cluster of long vax symptoms, you know, may actually have a persistent low level SARS-CoV-2 infection, just
Mm.
like that's which I think is also the root cause of the majority of long COVID symptoms.
Yes, gosh. So well, it's exciting. I do like to see a hypothesis being tested out.
So,
So
yes, yes. So, I mean, at this point, I've been running the formal study for a year. I have a pretty good idea of what, you
mm,
know, how people are responding. And I can say that so far, the water fasting appears to be very safe. We are tracking adverse events, but it's like random long COVID stuff, you know, like people are occasionally going to the ER for various concerns or issues. But we aren't seeing what I mean, people have done over 125 water fasts successfully so far, and no one has had. Uh, I mean, people have not had issues with their fasts, and sometimes they do one full day, sometimes they do two full days. It's their choice. So
mm,
I'm very confident now. Like this is safe, even for very sick long haulers to do. But watch out, heads up. You may feel worse upon refeeding for for a day or two.
yes, which I must say, after the elation of having spent a bit of time not eating and fasting, might be a bit of a disappointment to some, but you should look at it as a positive thing, I think, really.
Well, I mean, you have to you have to wait for like 4 or 5 days later, and then assess how your baseline symptoms are. And if your
Mm,
baseline symptoms are getting better, a little bit better each week, or sometimes dramatically better, then you know you're on the right track.
yeah, super. Absolutely brilliant. Um, anything else that you'd like to share? Because I hate cutting you off.
Uh, no, I think it's been a pleasant talking with you again, Lucinda, and I hope this is helpful to your listeners, and I wish you the best with your podcast.
Many thanks, Tom. It's been an absolute pleasure.